So our first panelist would be Dennis Anthony Glasgow, who is the founder of Aspire Youth Network Guyana and a sexual and reproductive health and rights advocate. Our second panelist is Moureeze Franklyn, an attorney at law with a passion for community development. She's currently the youth representative of the Caribbean Association for Feminist Research and Action, CAFRA, in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, as well as the country coordinator for the Commonwealth Youth Peace Ambassadors Network, SAIPAN. She is also the youngest serving board member of the St. Vincent and the Grenadines Chamber of Commerce and Industries. Chamber Industry and Commerce, sorry. Our third panelist would be Tember Cadette, a 22-year-old philanthropist and former pageant queen. Tember Cadette is currently the chairman and founder of Do Something Different, an entirely youth-driven, non-profit organization that seeks to assist and empower underprivileged youth in St. Lucia. As of recent, Ms. Cadette was awarded the St. Lucian Medal of Honor, Silver, for eminent service rendered in the field of youth development and voluntary service. Apart from her active philanthropy, she is also an avid dancer who aspired to become a digital brand strategist in the near future. Our third panelist is Roshana Trim. She's currently the president of the Caribbean Regional Youth Council and the president of the Barbados Youth Development Council and chairs the National Youth Policy Coordinating Committee. She also serves as the co-founder of Think Parliament, an initiative she co-founded, which aims at increasing the number of women in Parliament by providing mentorship to girls aged 14 to 20. Our fifth panelist is Giovanni Charles, a community leader and youth activist. Giovanni Charles is the founder of the Artistic and Cultural Youth Development Canvas, and also, which uses art to advocate on various issues affecting young people. He is also the country coordinator for the Commonwealth Youth Peace Ambassadors Network, St. Lucian chapter. And our sixth panelist, we have Mr. Ajani Lebourne. Mr. Lebourne, who was the recipient of the Queen Young Leaders Award in 2017, currently serves as the second vice president of the National Youth Council and has been an active youth leader or advocate for more than 5 years. He also served as the president of the National Students' Council back in 2015. Our last panelist, we have Danielle Greer, a Tobagonian activist living and working with the LGBTQ+ community in Grenada. Ms. Greer has a master's in clinical and community psychology and facilitates a series of psychosocial sessions at Grenada, as well as manages the safe space and programs offered by the center. A sexual health educator, she's a valuable member of the World AIDS Day Committee, Planning and Execution team. And I am your moderator for this afternoon, Randolph Fiojo, the Junior Communications Officer for the Eastern Caribbean Alliance for Diversity and Equality, ECADE, which is a non-profit regional NGO working with the Eastern Caribbean, including Barbados, St. Croix, and St. Martin. So once again, thank you all, welcome and good afternoon. With that, we will go straight into the panel by starting with Anthony Dennis Glasgow.
Hi, good afternoon, guys. Thanks for inviting me to the call. I'm kind of using my phone for my notes. That's kind of why you won't see my face. But I wanted to start this afternoon by saying Happy Pride to everyone on the call. As the flyer would have mentioned, I'm talking today about sexual reproductive health and rights. And I wanted to kickstart this conversation not by assuming that we all know what we're talking about when we say sexual health. So I'll give the WHO definition. The World Health Organization says that sexual health is a state of physical, emotional, mental, and social well-being in relation to sexuality. Sexual health requires a positive and respectful approach to sexuality and sexual relationships, as well as the possibility of having pleasurable and safe sexual experiences free from coercion, discrimination, and violence. I think it's important that we start the conversation off today talking primarily about that. We know that oftentimes we think that sexual health just affects women. but it's everyone's business. All of us are affected by sexual reproductive health in some way, shape, or form. We know that young people in the Caribbean are disproportionately affected by sexual reproductive health and some of the negative impacts that unhealthy sexual encounters can have, especially when we talk about young LGBT people in the region. We know that there's an added layer of vulnerability. So apart from being young, being a part of a minority group like the LGBT plus community puts young people in this community further at risk. And we know what I mean by that is that we know they have less access to education, less access to 9-to-5 jobs like some of us may have, and less access to even healthcare services that affect their sexual reproductive health. We need to do better and ensure that young LGBT people have access to information and services. So who really is going out there and interacting with the other LGBT groups in the Caribbean to ensure that young LGBT people have access to information? We know that in the Caribbean, there's a health and family life education program that sort of mimics or tries to open the door to reaching a comprehensive sexuality education curriculum to give young people the necessary information they need about protecting their bodies and their sexual health. But oftentimes, LGBT persons are missed or are left out of those dialogues. So it's important that we facilitate conversations about sexual health with LGBT people in the region. Violence against LGBT youth, even sexual violence, has affected the development of LGBT persons and the community and countries we belong to in the region. And we know that oftentimes in certain Caribbean countries, and I'll use Guyana as an example, we have seen in the past that there have been outright attacks against persons who are a part of the LGBT community. Some of this would have happened in the school setting, many of which would have forced young LGBT persons to drop out of school, thus limiting their chances of getting a better paying job or getting a high paying job like some of us who would have been able to graduate. As an SRHR advocate, there's often a perception that all LGBT young people are sex workers or all LGBT persons are sex workers in the Caribbean. As a result of dropping out of school, this does limit their options, but there is a misunderstanding or a misconnection there that all LGBT persons would automatically become sex workers. This is not the case in most of our countries, as many of them or some of them do have access to other jobs or other forms of employment. That being said, sex work is work. And let me remind you that we often try to, discriminate against sex workers and pull them down, but it is work. It's been one of the oldest professions in the world, and it's just that our legislation in the region has not yet moved towards reassuring that. In my previous life, at a previous job, I know I sound like I'm 50, but I'm not. We took our work to the streets to meet with sex workers in the night. And we talked to them about their health and about protecting themselves and their well-being. Many of them genuinely love the job that they do and the services that they provide. And I love to see it. I love to see people love to do what they do. However, some of them are there because of systems of violence that force them to the streets to work. It's not a bed of roses, as you all may know. Working at night, it's in itself adds vulnerability. So it's a very, very tricky and uncomfortable job for some. So we need to also, when we talk about sex workers and sexual health for sex workers, we need to meet them where they're at, and we need to be able to say, hey, let me put on my big boy cap and let me go and help those that I can help. So in closing, I wanted to reiterate the importance that as we celebrate Pride across the Caribbean, let's take a moment to remember the trans women and other LGBT persons in Guyana and across the region that would have lost their lives at the hands of violence, be it as a result of sex work, be it as a result of violence in schools, homes, or communities. Let us also take a moment to continue to advocate for laws and policies that protect LGBT persons in the workplace. Let us look at how we can keep more LGBT youth in school and give them a better shot at the life we all claim that we deserve. We know that the Sustainable Development would also have called for ending poverty, for alleviating poverty. It would have called for education. It would have called for good health, and all of these things that seem to be missing young LGBT persons and LGBT persons in the region. And finally, let us call on our governments to uphold the rights of LGBT people in the region and implement laws that explicitly protect against discrimination and lobby towards decriminalizing same-sex relations. Pride is not for LGBT persons alone. It is about LGBT people, but it's not just for LGBT people. Pride is for everyone, and it's for all of us in the Caribbean. So as we celebrate Pride and as we celebrate LGBT persons in the region, let us all remember that sexual reproductive health and rights are not just for heteronormative people who live and work in our societies. I thank you.
Thank you very much. With that, we go to our second panelist, and that would be second panelist for the day, Moureeze Franklyn. So could you please turn on your camera and your mic and you could start your presentation.
Oh shit. My apologies. I did not realize I was mute still.
Okay.
Right. So as I was saying, I have been having some technical difficulties. So I'm speaking from my phone and I'm not speaking from my original location. So as you all know, my field is the legal field, but I also do a lot of volunteer work concerning SRHR and particularly education of young girls as to their sexual reproductive health and rights, and basically correcting misunderstandings, where I also make it a point to work with young medical practitioners in providing education in schools or outside of schools where the particular schools may not accept our attempts to inform their students. And that what I also try to do is keep my focus to St. Vincent and the Grenadines, even though, I mean, the idea is that, you know, we can change regionally and change the world and all of those lovely things. I think for us, it begins with an understanding of the simple tenets of, yes, it's my body, my rights, because for us, we still have a lot of prohibitive provisions regarding hetero bodies. You know, we still have provisions on our books prohibiting what I refer to as indecent articles and acts of indecency. And so for us, I think just mastering the basics, we still haven't mastered that. You know, we're still debating about whether or not I can have a sex toy as a hetero person. So for us, a lot of the base issue is developing that understanding of people's right to bodily autonomy. And then we can begin to look at how we discriminate against LGBTQ people, especially in our laws. I mean, we are currently experiencing a legal challenge to our laws regarding homosexuality. We have the laws regarding buggery on our books and acts between consenting adults of the same sex. We currently have a legal challenge pertaining to those laws. And the one of the primary issues for us is understanding the separation of church and state. We still do not have any comprehension of that. We still do not understand that it's not our right to scorn and to look down on people simply because of the choices that they choose to make with their bodies. As for prostitution, we are miles away. We are light years behind. So we have a lot of work to do here in St. Vincent and the Grenadines regarding understanding of persons' rights to bodily autonomy. Okay, well, that's all I wanted to say, and then I'll just wait for the questions and comments.
We're moving on to our third panelist, Ms. Tember, Cadette.
Hi, everybody. Can you guys hear me clearly? Yes? No?
Yes, we can.
Okay, all right. Thank you. Hey, hi, good afternoon, everybody. Let me start off by saying it's such a pleasure to be here today with a panel of so many intelligent and dynamic and well-versed people. Happy Pride Month, of course, to the LGBTQ plus community. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Tember Cadette. I am the founder and now chairman of a youth-driven nonprofit organization called Do Something Different that really seeks to empower and assist underprivileged students on island, as well as sensitize the general public of the hardships endured by students attempting to further their education at all levels. DSD operates on the fundamental belief that education is a right and not a privilege. And we speak on education not just from an academic standpoint, but as well as being aware of the situations and the problems and the struggles and the hardships of everyone around us, young people or not. And we also believe that we can only succeed if we're given the tools to do so. That being said, we always say that we want youth to empower youth. We say youth empowering youth for success. And we launched DSD in 2017. And at that time had no idea it would become what it is now. Growing the organization over the last 3 years from 3 to 33 members and a branch in Canada. I'm here today to essentially speak on building and maintaining youth leadership in nonprofit organizations. And I think a lot of the times that we don't see the hard work that goes in behind the scenes of nonprofit organizations. It takes consistency. You really do have to be passionate about what you're doing. You have to be committed to it. And it's a constant learning process. Up to a day like today, there's some days when I don't know what I'm doing. But it's extremely important, as it's everything, to connect with people on a similar journey and to find mentors that can uplift us and push us and push you in the right direction, because it's paramount to your success. And just on what I've observed, the nature of LGBTQ plus NGOs can be quite sensitive in terms of other people's beliefs and bias and who's willing to agree on what should be done and what should not be done. Whereas I cannot say that I understand personally what it feels like. I can only imagine the courage that it takes to stand up and be counted. And so I think there's so much that needs to be learned and so many methods that need to be addressed. And as with everything else, we can always make an effort to do better and to understand one another. And what I will say is I believe that people fear what they do not understand. That being said, also, DSD is committed to empowering youth no matter where they are, no matter what they believe in, regardless of education, gender, religion, sex, sexual orientation. We support and we empower young people in St. Lucia and regionally when given the opportunity. We've been privileged to visit and engage with at least 20 schools on island, and one thing remains the same, that we all just want the chance to succeed. We all just want the chance to be great and to live a full and wholesome life irrespective of our personal decisions. And so I just wanted to say today that it's a pleasure to be on this call and to be a part of this discussion. And I hope that there is a lot of learning in the future for myself as well, and just for everyone here today.
Thank you very much, Tember. And with that being said, I'd just like to inform everyone that we're live on Facebook on Eastern Caribbean Alliance Diversity's Facebook page. So you could probably head over there and share with your network so they could join via Facebook. And now we move on to our fourth panelist, Roshana Trim out of Barbados.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. So let me start by saying thank you to the Eastern Caribbean Alliance for Diversity and Equality for inviting me this afternoon. And also to say happy Pride. I mean, the celebration of who you are and your life and your stories is so important. And so this afternoon, one of the main things I really want to talk about is how we don't get to pick and choose the young people that we tell that they can be all they can be and to walk in their truth and to speak in their truth. When in 2017, when resigned from the youth parliament here in Barbados, it was really on a matter that I felt very deeply about, and it was really the ability for young people, regardless of class, race, gender, and sexuality, or any other socioeconomic categorization, to be able to exist and to thrive in Barbados. And now, as chairperson of the Caribbean Regional Youth Council in the wider Caribbean, in whatever truth they exist in, and whatever space, and in their skin, and in their identity and who they are. And so that occurred because we weren't allowed to debate the decriminalization of buggery and acts that are prescribed or associated with members of the LGBTQ community, because the truth is that those things are associated with. And as such, in many of our countries, we use them as justification to exercise discrimination and bias and prejudice based on the idea that that only speaks to one section of our communities. And so that resignation came as me saying and saying to my peers that it was important that when we are given platforms as advocates, and when we create our platforms as advocates, particularly when it's youth advocacy and you seek to represent young people, you have to represent young people in all their intersectionalities. You have to represent all of their identity. You can't embrace, and I don't think you can embrace one aspect of somebody, such as their religion, but then seek to demonize or to discriminate against them because of their sexuality or something like that. And so in the Caribbean, what we find, and perhaps across the world, is that oftentimes we have persons who seek to represent persons, but we only want to represent them based on the parts of them that we appreciate, or that we accept, or that we love, or that we identify with. And it can't be, because I can't say that I love you as the person that you are and then seek to close my eyes to the things that I don't like about you. So for example, me having a friend who is homosexual, or who's a prostitute, or a friend who has a different religion, or who's a Muslim, and I love you, but I love every part of you except the part of you that's a Muslim, because I don't believe that I adhere strictly to Christianity. That in itself is not me loving you. I can't love you with that kind of conditioning, because I'm asking you to mute the side of you that I don't like. And so that's unfair. And so I don't want to be long, but like I said before, advocacy can't be simply heteronormative. So a youth advocacy can't be only for heterosexual young people who fit into the box. And it can't be for young people who only align with the traditional ideals and ideologies that many are rooted in bias and prejudice. We can search our communities and our countries, and we can find ideals and ideologies that align, that are based on racism and colorism and homophobia and all the other things, xenophobia, all those other things. And if you advocate for young people, you have to advocate for the removal of barriers and restrictions that exacerbate the conditions for young people who are particularly marginalized. Dennis mentioned earlier that young members of the LGBT community find themselves in situations where the usual challenges that young people have are exacerbated. So they're more likely to be unemployed. They're more likely to have difficulties accessing mental health and health facilities. They're more likely to be experience poverty, to be discriminated against, and all of those different things. So the truth is that for myself, and I believe for many of the advocates here, for all the advocates here, it is important that our advocacy, like I said, and this is perhaps where I'll close, that our advocacy recognizes every part of the persons who we are seeking to represent. And it has to be from a place of genuine tolerance and a genuine focus for people to do better. And the Caribbean isn't only the place for a straight Black or a straight Black girl with straightened hair to thrive. Is a place for the LGBTQ member to thrive. It's a place for a Black girl with locks to thrive, whether those be free farming or not. It's a place for a white person to thrive. It's a place for everybody to thrive. And we only get to do that if we advocate from a wholesome place and a place that recognizes the humanity and the love and the possibility and the potential for everybody in the Caribbean. So thank you so much.
And thank you, Roshana. You made some very, very, very good points and hit the nail right on the head. And with that, we'll be moving right along to Giovanni Charles.
Thank you so much, Randall. I just want to wish everyone a good day. My name is Giovanni Charles, and today I'm here to explore the nexus between the arts and pride. For me, I'm the founder of the Artistic and Cultural Youth Development Canvas, St. Lucia. And what we do in this organization is that we employ arts and culture to aid in youth development, to aid in community development and social development. And we also want to increase and broaden cultural and historic information to young people of St. Lucia. And we want to do so by encouraging youth participation in cultural events. And that includes festivals, that includes traditional practices. And we want to ensure that an educational experience is created for those young persons. And we serve as a voice for the artistically inclined, whether you're into poetry, whether you're into singing, music, there is a safe space for you, because we as the artistic community, we find comfort in each other, knowing that we can all just be artistically free and creative and just express however we feel. And of course, with that being said, we operate at an open door policy. And that means that every single person is accepted, regardless of the identity that they may choose to have. All that matters to us is that you are able to come in and do the work that is required for us to do as an organization, that we expand that reach to other young artistic persons, and that we encourage them to just be free with who they are. So when we look at the arts and pride, it is no stranger that the arts is something that can bring almost anyone together. When we look at music, music is something that almost every single culture can relate to. But many times people don't realize how the LGBTQ community has impacted the artistic scene. When we look at fashion, a lot of the icons in fashion are LGBTQ persons. And we still have persons walking around with the mentality that I will not wear this just because it was created by an LGBTQ person. And that is something that we do not stand for, because art is art. As much as art may be subjective, and it is something that will pull someone, because not everyone walks into a store and see an art piece that they would want to pick up. You know, it will definitely hit for different people. But when it comes to going beyond the creator of the art and trying to say that because so-and-so person who is a representative of a certain community is the one who created this, that is the reason for me not supporting, this is where the issue comes in, and this is where I will always disagree. But what we want to do as ACIDC, which is also a shortened term for the Artistic and Cultural Youth Development Canvas, is that we want to do more research on those cultural forms and those art forms that will still include elements of discrimination that we do not stand for. And many of us here are from the Caribbean, and if we look at Carnival, which is a festival that is celebrated in many countries, why do we still have soca music and certain lyrics that are still discriminatory? We have to look forward, we have to look into that and try to do a little bit more research to understand and to note that this is really not what we should stand for as a region. And I understand that our laws are still, you know, very much pushed back and are in a place that they're not supposed to be. But we need to understand that everyone is human, regardless of the identity. We need to see and love people for the fact that they are human. Because before you walk in the streets, you see someone for being human. Nobody really walks around with a sign saying, "Hi, I'm LGBTQ." That's not how it works. We love people because they are human, and that is what it should be. So with that being said, I just want to say that I would like to encourage that every organization represented here continues, if they do not have this policy, but continues to work on having an open door policy to ensure that everyone is accepted, because all that should matter is getting the work done. And also, I want to say that in recent times, well, currently we're seeing a lot of persons involved in the Black Lives Matter movement. All Black lives matter. And that includes the Black LGBTQ plus life. Because we are seeing people saying Black lives matter, but not you. And that shouldn't be. If we want to be a part of the human rights movement, we have to ensure that, and we have to note that every single life matters in this fight. So happy Pride, everyone. And this is what I have to say in regards to ACIDC and how we look at pride and the arts and culture.
Thank you very, very much, Giovanni. Some really good points, and I mean, some questions will come out of that. And our next panelist, we have Ajani Lebourne.
Thank you very much, Randall. And I want to firstly begin by extending my sincere thanks to the Eastern Caribbean Alliance for Diversity and Equality. At this point, I think it is the opportune time to have this level of discussion, as it is the Pride Month, and I want to extend this time. I want to use this time to really thank the organization also for seeing this as an opportunity for youth organizations, youth leaders to dissect the issues surrounding the reason why many NGOs have not been able to approach youth leadership from an inclusive standpoint. My perspective to this discussion will be one which will speak to general advocacy and how we can firstly look to approach the issue of inclusivity and the issue of diversity from a lens of firstly sensitization and education, then looking at breaking down the youth development barriers and the youth engagement barriers rather that are present within our society. That will speak also to partnerships and building coalitions, which I think within our environment, within our landscape, in St. Lucia and in the Eastern Caribbean, there are several gaps within where national youth councils and other NGOs are not developing or not opening up their operations to welcome freely members of marginalized communities. And also the third point that I want to speak to today will speak to prioritization in terms of setting priorities and looking at low-hanging fruit so that we could be able to realize success along the way and celebrate small successes. So I want to really speak to briefly something that I came across while reading a document, and it spoke to a report on the implementation of the Lisbon Declaration on Youth Policies and Programs by the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean. And it states support for national and regional youth councils and youth platforms that promote wider youth networking and participation demonstrate the evolving role for youth within the development process. However, there still needs to be attention being placed to the experiences of grassroots and community-based youth, as well as LGBTQ, and other marginalized youth populations, reflecting cultural bias and inequalities. And this was published, I think it was published in 2017. In 2020, being a youth leader, I've served from the community to the national level. I still don't think that the relevant education and sensitization has been executed to a level where young people have been open to platforms, and particularly marginalized groups have been open to platforms to share their struggles and to share their challenges. There is that wide miseducation on, in terms of gender roles. There is miseducation on issues surrounding discrimination, particularly as it relates to the roles that young males play within society. And there is also the stigma being placed on young males who, based on our traditional approach or traditional understanding of the roles of males in society, their more or less viewed from a different lens. So the National Youth Council, of course, whilst I'm not representing the NYC on this platform, I want to share that the National Youth Council must continue to serve the young people. And I want to share, based on what Roshana would have added, that as youth leaders and youth advocates, we must continue to find ways to be able to bridge those gaps. So I would have mentioned to you, Randall, that at this point, the NYC has not been able to have that frank discussion with the leaders within United and Strong. We've not been able to have that frank discussion with other youth leaders, particularly regarding issues of discrimination and marginalization of young people. And until we could get to that point, I think it places us in a better situation. It places young people in a better environment whereby youth organizations, which are bargaining agents, youth organizations, which are representative bodies at various levels, can be prepared, can be educated enough to represent. And I think that's where some of the gaps are. The other gaps present relate to how we're able to present the organization as one which speaks the language of marginalized groups. And then again, it always falls back onto youth organizations which have not youth organizations which have not opened up themselves to accountability by membership. And I believe that accountability is on both ends, from leadership down to membership. But then membership also needs to be very aware that your responsibility is to add pressure. And as a young person within any marginalized group, I think we should not allow youth leaders to run away, we should not allow youth leaders to be comfortable within positions whereby they must be openly advocating, like Roshana says, on behalf of all young people, regardless of sex, race, gender, regardless of your diversity. And I think it's about really ensuring that we as young people are able to respect youth for being youth. And I want to end this opening by stating that one of my favorite authors and speakers says the main thing that we should keep maintain is a united front wherein our most valuable time and energy will not be spent fighting against each other. And we do that too much within the Caribbean environment. I think as young people, we should realize that the priorities for young people should be ensuring that youth are within a space and environment which facilitates their growth and development. Too many times you look at the differences, the petty differences, and then we fight against that, whilst policymakers run away with everything else. So I think we should begin to set those base priorities, and I hope as the discussion unfolds, then I could provide more solid advice as to the way forward regarding the relationship between NGOs and other marginalized communities.
Thank you, Ajani. We'll definitely be looking forward to that. And now we move on to Danielle Greer.
Hi, good afternoon. I just want to start by saying thank you to ECADE for inviting me to be on this panel, as well as to all the other panelists who gave some strong points in what they had to say. I was vibing to some of the things that were happening and some of the points that were made. In my sphere, I work at GrandJob, which is a sexual and reproductive health advocacy organization, but we're primarily known for working with the LGBT community. And in getting the prompt for having this discussion, and Randall spoke to us about pride, the first thing I thought about was this visible pride. A lot of the Caribbean countries have been having their pride celebrations, which I think is really impactful. It's really important for the general public to see us and to be able to recognize that we're here, we're queer, and we're not going anywhere. But also, I want us to be able to also push the narrative that we are also like everybody else. We've been pushing the LGBT people as separate when we really aren't. And I was vibing with Ms. Trim when she talked about the intersectionality. I think a lot of pride celebrations and visual pride needs to focus on diversity. We need to focus on showing people that this isn't anything different than, liking turkey sandwiches instead of ham sandwiches, having brown hair instead of having black hair. We're all diverse. The human race is diverse, and we need to start focusing and celebrating that. And I think that is the main point that I wanted to really bring across. because of how much we've been focusing on an us against them kind of narrative, when I think we need to make sure that everybody knows this isn't something alien. It's something that has existed for a long time, and you know, we need to start making sure that everybody is included. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Danielle. And with that, I say thank you to all our panelists for your brief presentation. And we go straight into questions now. I see there's a question in the chat. And the first question is from one of our panelists to another panelist. And the question reads, well, it's for everyone, sorry. But he thinks Roshana Train would be able to address it. Do you think that LGBT persons in the Caribbean are well integrated into youth movements in the region? And then he made a point, and it's like, I think there's a youth movement on one side and LGBT youth on the next. I find that many youth leaders are homophobic and elitist and only enter youth spaces to wear fancy suits and ties, but are out of touch with the realities of minority groups. Based in the spaces where they do more harm than good. And that question is from Dennis Glasgow. Roshana, you maybe might want to join in and answer that.
Yeah, so because I spoke about intersectionalities originally, I'm not certain that the question should be whether or not LGBT young people are integrated into the youth movement, because they are. I think the better question perhaps is if their interests are being pushed or at the forefront of the movement, or if we give them priorities, which I don't think that we do. I also think that they don't have the necessary visibility. So, for example, in Barbados, with the Barbados Development Council, we've made a lot of effort to engage groups that specifically focus on LGBTQ rights. So Equals, Be Glad, She, all the different groups that focus on those rights, we've tried to engage. And in doing so, we've been able to have persons be more present, but also more open. But I've also been told that Barbados is a much more open community or society as it relates to LGBTQ persons than across the region, and I can't say for sure or not. So if the question is whether or not the particular interests of LGBTQ persons are at the forefront of the movement, or that they take priority, I don't think that they do. I do know that we have many persons from the community actually involved in youth work. On the second point, in the particular interests of LGBTQ persons are at the forefront. The particular point as it relates to doing more harm than good, young people who enter into youth leadership are still subjects, or perhaps victims is a better term sometimes, of their environments. And there's a lot of unlearning that needs to happen in many spaces and for many young people when they enter certain roles. And this can be attached to how we understand society, how we understand roles, how we understand people, how we conceptualize the persons that we are engaging with. And that's why entering advocacy with the idea of leadership through service is important. Because when you come from a place where you are offering leadership through service, you are open to understanding, you are open to creating change based on having knowledge. If you come believing that you know it all, that your stance is correct, if you come without being willing to understand and to be open and to seek new knowledge and engage persons in new spaces, then you are going to have a challenge. And I think that's one of the issues that we have, that sometimes we come not acknowledging that we don't know it all. And when we come not acknowledging that we don't know it all, we do more harm than good, because we never seek to actually ask the persons that we are that we represent, or the persons on whose behalf we wish to speak on, what it is that they want from us. And if I don't know what you want from me, if I don't know what kind of food you need, then how do I feed you? How do I provide you with nourishment? And I could give you all different things that I have. I could give you all the sushi and caviar and shrimp and lobster and all of that, when that's not really what you need, and that's not really what you're looking for. And so that's how I think to answer the question. It's just twofold. One, no, yes, I don't know, to a certain extent, but really and truly that as leaders, we have to be open to engaging and changing our mindsets and what we believe in order to respond to the needs of the community.
Okay, Dennis, I see your hands up, so I guess you want to respond to what Roshana was saying, so go right ahead.
Yes, Randall. Thanks, Roshana, for your frankness and for your honesty too. But it kind of also answered my question, as in I specifically asked if they're well integrated, which I feel you answered that by saying yes and no, to which I completely understand and agree with. Because I feel as if sometimes, as you said, we say, oh, we're youth leaders and we speak on behalf of young people, but we only pick and choose the issues that we go hard for, or the issues that we're going to stand in front of people and speak to. And I think that's highly hypocritical for people who call themselves youth advocates and call themselves youth leaders, that they don't understand that intersectionality or those intersectionalities that you mentioned. And I think that's important that we understand that. I personally am not being unrealistic and expect every youth leader to know it all about the environment, to know it all about Indigenous people's issue, to know it all about LGBT issues. But I feel there needs to be a reality check with young people across the region who are involved in civil society that, hey, people are being affected by our behaviors. It's being affected by our culture, as Giovanni said. How are we gonna, realistically, as Ajani said afterwards, make recommendations to change these things? And I think those aren't the conversations that we're really having as young people. But I wanted to note specifically that in the region, it presents a big opportunity for us to understand the importance of how small we are as a region and how small we are as countries, to not do what Ajani said, which is separate ourselves and appear to be, in pockets of young people all across our countries. So to prove the politicians' point that the young people can't organize, the young people can't mobilize, the young people don't know what they want, we're proving their point the second we continue to fight down the other young people, or the second we go into youth spaces, regional youth spaces, and because someone is assumed to be LGBT, other young people don't want to speak to them and things like that. I think we need to understand the importance of coming together as a unit. So in closing, I'll reiterate the importance of the role of not just LGBT organizations in the region, but all youth organizations, to understand the importance of having inclusive movements and movements that are strengthened by the voices of all young people. Because one of the things I always say when people use or quote me as a youth representative, I say that I'm a youth that can only represent my experiences. So I'm not a representative to all young people. And that's the reality we need to all check ourselves with and understand the privileges that we all come to the table with. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dennis, Roshana, your hand was up. Do you want to respond, or that's fine?
Okay, so yeah, one of the things that Dennis said that really struck me was that, sometimes you don't know, as young people, sometimes we don't know the persons that we are influencing or who's paying attention. And one of the things that I've always noticed would be, say I would be in a space and we would be having discussions about something, and we'd make a comment, or somebody would make a comment, and my eyes would maybe glance to the left or glance to the right, or I'll be like, oh no, because I know that there's somebody in the room who felt like who you just like marginalized, or who you just made a statement and you don't know anything about that person, or you don't know that person's situation and you made a comment that hit home or sought to kind of that disempower that person or sought to do so because you had no idea. And Dennis is right. I think a lot of us have to check our privilege. For example, as I know that as a heterosexual young woman, I have a privilege in certain regards and in certain spaces. There are no laws that necessarily directly criminalize anything or make persons feel like they have the right to take away my life or anything like that. Like there's a level of privilege that I have. But also Ajani, before I close this one, Ajani said something that I thought was really important when he talked about those partnerships and those linkages. Like I mentioned before, and I keep going back to intersectionalities because I just feel like that's really important in seeing people as human beings. And so when we partner with, say, Do Something Different, or when we partner with national youth councils or with any other organization, ECADE, anything, that amplifies the voices of young people, that amplifies the voices of young people who are engaged in all those spaces, who all those spaces cater to. And it also says to governments that young people are united and we understand the challenges that young people face. And while I might not be affected by a specific issue, I am willing to pull up because I am a young person and I identify with the challenges and the struggles that other young people face. And that is really, really important, that level of connection and saying, you know, I see you, I see your struggle, and I'm willing to stand by you because I recognize your humanity and I recognize who you are.
Thank you, Roshana. I think my point is that I probably would have to agree with what you and Dennis said, because at the end of the day, when we really look at it, young people, most of us actually enter fields that we're passionate about. For example, you'll get more females wanting to enter youth NGOs that relates to them, where they want to empower young women to be better, to better themselves. You would find most of the guys entering, youth organizations that focus on sports, some who want to deal with the issues that men face. And then there are very few young people who would actually go into fields that deal with the more marginalized youth, right? I'm not sure if it's coming from a place that, where they feel like, okay, I'm part of that community, so let me just go there to see how I could help their lives become better. Or if it's, I should say, a privilege that they have being accepted by their family members and friends, and that gives them like the boost or the energy that they need and wanting to make a difference in somebody else's life. So yes, and I mean, another question, something that I was going to say, I see the question is now in the chat and it reads, I guess that's for all our panelists. How are you using social media and platforms to show you an ally? And how do you go about doing this with you and ally? And okay, I think there's an error there, but I'll try to work it out. How are you using social media platforms to show you are an ally? And how do you go about your family? Like, let me see, I could put like you.
I think he's asking what we think about our family and security. What if we do use social media to engage on these issues?
Yeah.
Yeah? Yeah, because for me, I mean, that's an issue because I'm living in the dark ages, okay, guys? I live in the dark. People, so we have a lot of that, and it's just commonplace and it's just normal. And I'm out here sharing my rainbow memes and sharing this and sharing. That's what I do because my friends look at me as the meme queen. So the meme queen's gonna share the rainbow memes today, and she's gonna talk about LGBTQ rights and abortion and all these controversial issues. And people start to look at you. I mean, sometimes they they put you in a category in their minds, like, okay, well, she's gonna be against me, or she's gonna bring these people around me, or she's gonna do these things, you know. So they really make an effort to sort of not engage with you sometimes, and then they might say, okay, I mean, somebody might call my mother and say, you know, that's what she using Facebook to do, you know. Yes, I think about my family, but I do it regardless, and I really don't care. I'm sure my mother knows me by now, so sucks to be her.
Yeah, so anybody else want to jumping on that point? Or the question, more or less?
For me, social media, I repost a lot of the things that we have on the Grand Chat page because a lot of it is about inclusion and diversity. And people know me as the person that works at Grand Chat. People know that this is the work that I do. But I have the privilege of not living on the island that I grew up on. So there's nobody really checking in on me per se to see what I'm doing, to see what's happening. So I don't have people going to my mom to tell her anything like that. So I'm not worried about my family or about security. It's a freeing experience to not be in that situation. But in terms of things going back to my parents, things going back to my home island, generally I get good feedback about it because this is human rights work, and people who see it as human rights work. So I'm blessed in that way that I don't have to think about it.
Thank you, Danielle. So before I open the floor to our attendees to ask any questions, I think I have another question, and that goes to all the panelists. How do you see the work that your organization does? Do you see the work that your organization does can help other CSOs, NGOs, or pride committees, in fact, to help raise awareness on the issues affecting these already marginalized groups?
Well, part of the issue for me is sort of working to develop a culture of tolerance and like understanding. I think that's where it begins. So most of the work that I do is more about having open discussions with young people and still educating them and trying to get past a lot of the boundaries that we have in terms of, I mean, when I attempt to engage young people, I still have to worry about, okay, are you attending a religious school? Is the school going to make an issue of what I'm trying to tell you about? So for me, I'm trying to sort of grease the wheels so that eventually people can have some level of tolerance and respect for LGBTQ people because they already accept persons who they might view as living on the fringes of society.
Well, I think I can jump. Okay, go ahead.
Else, but okay, so earlier when somebody mentioned about, yes, I think it was you, Dennis, including LGBTQ people, why I'm speaking to such a broad approach is partially because, I mean, I had a conversation with a friend once, you know, so I'm president of this other youth organization, and we're talking, and I'm telling her, you know, you should join. And she says, that's for bougie people. And that's an issue that we have here, because we don't have a lot of youth organizations in the first place. And to try to open the door is such a struggle because there's already a perception that, okay, I need an invitation to join and I don't know that person, so I'm not going to get an invitation, or, you know, I'm not rich enough, or I'm not this enough, or I'm not that enough. So that for me is part of the issue, that you might not enter the space because you don't feel welcome, and then it just and then the persons who are already in the spaces don't engage you, so we just end up with a visible lack of representation on the part of LGBTQ people and other people who might not necessarily already be in those spaces.
I just wanted to jump in after Ms. Franklyn, because I think she kind of responded directly to what I wanted to mention too, which is that for my organizations, because there are a few of them, one of the things that we strive to do with our executive and with our management team is that we have inclusion. So there must be someone from the indigenous group that must be present. There must be someone who's LGBT. There must be persons who come from the bougie the upper class, as you call it, and there must be people who come from the hood, like people like me. So one of the things that is important is that persons need to feel, or as Moureeze mentioned, persons need to see someone like them. People need to see that they are represented in a space for them to be willing enough to participate and enter that space. And a lot of the times, because of how our societies are homophobic and, so uncomfortable, a lot of people are LGBT but aren't openly LGBT persons that exist in these spaces and these movements. Those aren't necessarily the ones we want to lead the charge, because then persons still won't feel represented or see themselves represented. So it's important that when we are looking at our boards, when we're looking at our management committees, when we're looking at the organizations, like for instance, if you're for instance, Roshana and you're Trim, Miss Trim, and you're part of CRIG, you know that when you're looking at your collaborations and looking out to roll out a project or any sort of activity, that it is inclusive. So as she's mentioned a few times on the call, like she knows directly who those LGBT organizations are in Barbados that she can call on, if they're not a part of her organization per se, and I'm definitely sure they are. But it goes to show that it goes beyond that networking, and our organizations need to be outright in how we put ourselves out there to include and to attract everyone, especially not to have that sort of tokenistic representation of LGBT persons. Like, hey, just to check it off the box, we got somebody who identifies as lesbian or who identifies as gay. We could check that off the box. That's fine. But we need to have people who are going to come to the forefront and who are going to lead and who are going to be representatives of their communities and ensure that in every single organizational activity that LGBT persons and other minority groups are to be considered.
Thank you, Dennis. Tember.
Yes, so to speak to the question that you posed, Randall, in St. Lucia in particular, I can say it's kind of a tough spot to be in with regards to how does our organization show solidarity, I guess, or support for the LGBTQ community. And I say that because although we focus on youth, we directly focus on students. And when we do school visits, one thing that we try to push, or one principle that we stand by, is we always speak on respect and respecting each other, respecting persons' boundaries, respecting, people's decisions. And we always preach, so to speak, that no matter where someone comes from, how they are, what they do, we treat each other the same. And I say that because we cannot really go into a school and start speaking on the LGBT. That's just not going to go down well at all. That could literally cause uproar. And so I think I can speak for DSD and say that we take it from an angle of one, respect, as I said, and two, inclusion. And we don't discriminate against who can join the group. We don't discriminate against where we can go or what we can do or who we support. And I think for us, because of the country that we operate in, that is what we can do. And because we have members of the team who are part of the community, it makes it easier because they can then speak to us and say, okay, well, Tember, I think that we could do X, Y, Z, ABC, or can we support this, or can you do this better? Because I can say, and to speak to what was said earlier, I can say that there's so much about the community that I have no clue. Like, I'm always sliding some of these DMs like, excuse me, can you explain this, can you explain that? But I feel like that's my part as a leader, as a youth advocate, to actively try to learn more and to be informed about what's going on. So I think from the standpoint within St. Lucia, because of our context and how things operate, that is what we try to do, and that's what I try to do. And I'm happy to be on this discussion so I can kind of hear other angles that we could potentially take it from, and see how we could move forward.
Thank you. So we have Ajani, then Danielle, and there's a few questions in the chat that I will ask afterwards.
Thanks, Randall. Apologies if I can't turn on my camera because I realized my phone my charge went down, so I'm kind of charging it right now. But nevertheless, I was listening to Dennis's comment regarding the fact that youth organizations need to take up that inclusive approach to operating. And I honestly totally agree with him in terms of ensuring that we must have firstly the approach which ensures that, you know, through every program that is launched, through every initiative that is carried out, we have that sense of inclusivity being, I guess, a center principle of our work. However, I think we should be mindful to not have an approach which can promote tokenism to an extent. And I say it because I think the role that youth organizations play must, and youth organizations, but mostly youth leadership plays, should be to facilitate. I think we should view ourselves as more facilitators. And you see, because of the fact that you have many youth leaders, and I think Roshana mentioned it earlier, you have many youth leaders who come into youth spaces and have not done the unlearning that is necessary, and they have not subjected themselves to these spaces or the content and the information that will allow them to have a holistic approach to youth leadership. Then you find those barriers are being developed, and it makes it much difficult for other young people to be represented through those organizations. So firstly, I think before we see it as a must to move into inclusive approaches, I think we should pressure and we should guide and work with youth leaders to begin to develop that approach to facilitating the interest, facilitating the passion, facilitating the skills and talents of young people who fall under the jurisdiction. Tember spoke to something also that personally I can identify to. I could refer to myself as someone who's been around the youth space for a few years now, but I can't say I'm an expert in sexual reproductive health, or I can't say I'm an expert in understanding, you know, some of the struggles, major struggles of the LGBT community. A lot of what I can confess to may be surface, but I think now it's the time for us as youth leaders to begin to subject ourselves to those real and frank discussions, because sooner or later we'll find ourselves in an environment where no matter what as young people we demand, no matter what as young people we think should be prioritized for youth within the Caribbean, unless we can find common ground with what we want to advocate for, it's basically futile at the end of the day. And I want to also say that for United and Strong, specifically within St. Lucia, I think what we need to look to do is to build those organizations from the community level, whereby you begin to identify, you begin to rope in and encourage the members and young people with similar interests from that level, so that because most youth who have varying interests, particularly youth within marginalized communities, you find a lot of the times they may not be so inclined to, because of the widespread discrimination, they may not be inclined to identify with a national organization up front. But within a community setting, they're comfortable. So I think these are some of the low-hanging fruits that we can look to begin to work on. Facilitating the spaces within communities where youth could have that level of discussion, facilitating the programs within communities where youth could get the level of psychosocial support that they require. Because by the time they get to the national level, it is a very difficult nut to crack in ensuring that you could get young people to express themselves on a national level, knowing that, you know, the discrimination is coming and the security is a big thing regarding young people, ensuring that they're within a space where they could express themselves freely. So that's something I think we can look at some more.
Thank you. Danielle, and then we'll go to the chat, the questions in the chat room.
Yes, I was listening to Dennis and Moureeze talk about inclusivity of people and people seeing others like themselves in the forums. And it brought me to think about the reach that we have as organizations. Who are we reaching? Who do these things get to? Like something like this would reach a certain part of the population. but does it reach the people who really need it? One of my favorite things that Grand Job has done in the past is that we've gone into some of the areas in the towns and just had conversations with people randomly, and having them discuss the issues around LGBT population, around sexual and reproductive health. And because some of the people that they are with, so they're in town with somebody and that person has a differing idea than them, a more inclusive idea than them, and they're more likely to take that idea into consideration, into thinking about LGBT things and sexual health things in a different way. So reaching them in a way that is not as academic as we do things, because we tend to do things in an academic setting, and really trying to reach people where they're at.
Thank you. So now we have a question in the chat from Lucian. Part of the change for young people generally is to lead, particularly as it comes to building on the successes from the past or present, as well as learning from the challenges from those days. How can young people everywhere contribute to that, or how do they? And I guess that's a general question for the panelists. So if anyone would like to answer, go ahead. Would you like me to repeat the question? Okay. Part of the change for young people generally is to lead, particularly as it comes to building on the successes from the past or present, as well as learning from the challenges from those days. How can young people everywhere contribute to that, or how do they?
I'll take a go at the question. And I'll say that we aren't a generation that reads. There have been multiple studies and research that has been done in the past. And we think that every time we join movements, we have to reinvent wheels. And we don't often look to build upon what has already happened and successes that has already happened, or challenges that existed in the movement, or the wave of people in the movements before us. So I get the thought process behind Lucian's question. And to respond directly, I would say that a part of it is to have that networking with organizations that in civil society spaces where there is an increased need for intergenerational dialogues. How many of us that are a part of our national youth councils know previous presidents or past presidents of the youth councils? This is just to be general here. Or how many of us from other organizations know those who came before us and have some sort of rapport with them, or can go to them for advice, that can go to them for guidance? I think the best learning comes through storytelling and conversations, but it's important that those things that were documented are being referenced when we look towards doing projects. And I'll give an example. One of the things that has happened in spaces of sexual reproductive health is that we've been talking about how peer education is important, and how it's important that young people can talk to their peers about their sexual reproductive health and rights. When there have been studies in the past that showed that may not always work in every setting. So that kind of counters the entire process of us advocating for peer-to-peer interventions, when sometimes peers themselves are experiencing issues that they can't necessarily be there to help. So my point is that oftentimes we think we need to reinvent the wheel, or we need to do something the way we are seeing it in this current moment and in this current time, without rationalizing where we came from, so that we can understand where we're trying to go. And I think as young people and as youth leaders, we need to understand how important it is to reach out to the Lucians. This is me calling Lucian old. Or reach out to the persons who are, have been a part of these spaces before, and understand how best we can achieve what we ultimately want together.
So I want to weigh in here. My two things would be, definitely, as Danny said, it's really important to connect with persons who've existed in spaces before you. So I can tell you that since I've become chairperson of CRIC, I've engaged the past chairpersons who have sat in the post before me. I can tell you from BYDC perspective that I often engage past presidents or persons who have been in the youth advocacy movement long before me, because there are some things that baffle me and I want to find out about. I think that sometimes when what we see as reinventing the wheel is often this recognition that how things are going aren't working. And that's where I may differ from Dennis a bit. So I'm the kind of person who will come and say, you know what, we've been doing the same thing for 20 years. And we see this when we go to conferences. So you'll go to a conference and a minister will say, well, you know, I was once a youth leader like you, and I used to do conferences. And we used to have these same discussions and we wanted these same things. And I'm in the audience saying, so why are you still doing it then? Why do I still have to have the same discussion? Why are we still doing the same things that we've been doing all the time? And so it's really important that you then take a new approach. And I think the way how this generation has started to change that is that we're more open to change. Like, we're more open to go against the status quo, and we'll keep going against the status quo. But I think we also need to kind of lean on each other and help each other, because it also gets disheartening. And so there has to be this more so focus on leaning on each other and engaging each other and using each other to bolster and assist. And those partnerships that Ajani focused very heavily on initially, that becomes very, very important in the youth movement. And so those discussions have to be across the region. So for example, let me go back to CRIC. As a regional organization, it's so important that when we have discussions about what happens next for young people and where does the youth movement go and what should the focus be for the Caribbean and what we advocate for, that young people from across the region are within the space that we do so. And the young people that we engage aren't only the choir, but they're also young people who might not traditionally be engaged in the discussions that we are having. I think that as youth organizations, we need to broaden our reach and broaden our net. And we also need to be very willing to say, you know, this isn't working, let me do something else. And sometimes we need to be able and very willing to shake the table and make persons uncomfortable, because discomfort is what creates change. People don't change because they're comfortable. You're not changing your couch because you really, really like it. I keep the same toy or my same laptop or my same computer because it's really nice. Like, I like this. When my chair becomes uncomfortable, when my desk starts to break or starts to lean, that's when I change it. And the same thing works with advocacy, and the same way it works with everything else. Governments change policy because people make them uncomfortable or they feel threatened. And that's how we do it. Making people, particularly because they feel really comfortable sometimes that they've been voted in for 20 years, they're not going anywhere.
While I do agree with you, Roshana, I just wanted to say, I mean, what Dennis said to me is always a point of contention, because in terms of learning to utilize strategies that would have worked before, or programs that you have concrete evidence, okay, this is something that can function. I find that, yes, our young people don't read, but our older persons don't read either. So nobody cares about what happened before. We're not interested. We're not even interested in doing a simple Google search to figure out how something. No, we're just gonna just. I don't even know. I don't even understand. I'm always like, do we have the same internet? I don't understand. I mean, I went and I read and I did this and I did that. Or you would say, okay, well, you know what? I have information as to stuff that may help with problems that you're experiencing currently. And it's just this complete reluctance to even take a glance at the materials. So that for me is always like an issue. But I am with you on turning over the table. That's a favorite activity of mine as well, but I think there needs to be a balance still.
Okay, thank you. Well, with the interest of time, we scheduled for an hour and a half. And although we started late, we have already reached that time. But I mean, before we end, I'm just going to read the questions that's in the chat and then give you the panelists a chance to respond or respond to any of the comments made previously by one of the panelists before we end the session. So the next question, I mean, that's directed to, there's 1, 2, 3 St. Lucians on the panel, and I mean myself, so I could respond. And the question is like, when the United and Strong LGBT Advocacy Group changed their logo to include the St. Lucian flag, much of the public and our own families responded saying that gay people are not part of our culture, or that it's illegal, so we should go somewhere else to do it. This leaves a lot of us, especially youth, still finding out our place in the world, feeling like foreigners in our own homes. How do we educate the general public of the presence and importance of the LGBT people in society? I mean, I could start first by responding to that. I think we could start by the schools. Because I mean, if you look at the people who have, if we look at our parents during their time, I would say there wasn't much knowledge, so our parents might not be that inclined to educate the children or educate their grandkids on the issues that affect LGBT people in St. Lucia or the Caribbean by extension. So I think what we could do if we challenge the schools, and I mean, it goes back to having an entire comprehensive sexual education syllabus introduced in the schools, which will speak on, you know, gender identity, sexual orientation, sexual reproductive health and rights. So if we do that and educate these children, then they could go back and educate their parents. And I think it will just be the cycle where you educate one and they educate like 2, 3 people, so that it will just be this line or this graph that, you know, I keep on educating everybody I meet. And if they say something that's not true, then I could just jump in and let them know the truth on what it is. And also, and I think my last point will lead to Giovanni, and that is if we could use the arts as a way to raise awareness on the issues affecting the already marginalized groups. I mean, recently, I think sometime last year, Giovanni's organization was involved in a production in Castries, and it was more or less about raising awareness on LGBT issues. So with that being said, I will go over to Giovanni, who will then speak on that and give his response to the question.
Thank you very much, Randall. I think in regards to United and Strong receiving intense backlash for including the St. Lucian flag, I'm not too aware of the situation, but I will say that I'm extremely happy that the organization decided to continue doing its work. And like Roshana said, they decided to continue making people feel the discomfort. So much so that I believe that we're at a time where people are, I'm pretty sure that some of those persons who may have bashed the movement back then are a little bit more, you know, open to the idea of the flag being in the logo. But that's exactly what we need to do. We need to shake the tables. And drawing reference to the initiative that we hosted last year in October, we decided that we will do a human rights flash mob. And knowing your community, we know that St. Lucians love a spectacle, St. Lucians love a performance, St. Lucians love something visual. So we decided that we're going to take dance and drama to the heart of Castries, that's the capital. And it was a collaboration between PCI Media Impact, Creative Dance for Living Dance Academy, and the Artistic and Cultural Youth Development Canvas. One of the pieces that, well, one of our main pieces would have been a solo dance by one of our members. And he held a very huge pride flag in Constitution Park, that's in the heart of the capital, dancing to the song, This Is Me. I'm not sure if many people are familiar with it, but it's a very powerful song. And the spectacle, I mean, regardless of receiving negative comments, that is okay. Because just like one of our members, our team members said, it would not be a St. Lucian performance if something was LGBTQ and there were no negative comments. We would have done something incorrect. And the fact that we were able to shake the tables to get those comments out of people, that actually made us feel better, because that's what we wanted. We really want to know what is it, what are the negative things that you have to say? We want to know. And it's not that we we are comfortable in being discriminated against and so on. We just need to know, because if we don't know that information, we will not know how to move forward. So for us, it was a very big step in regards to human rights that we were able to have that flag wave so well in a dance in the middle of Castries, and persons were paying attention, and not just, we didn't just put on the performance, there was also an information booth. So for individuals just passing by and they decided to just stop and watch, there was an opportunity for them to go to the information booth and get information on LGBTQI rights in St. Lucia and how we plan on moving along, and not just in St. Lucia, but in the Caribbean. And also we looked at sexual health and reproductive rights. So it was a very informative performance, and that's what we want to do. We want to use these spectacles to educate persons. So that is the initiative that we did. We do look forward to doing more, but there are many ways that we can get to persons. And I believe that St. Lucians, for sure, not just St. Lucians, but like I said, the arts is something that will bring a lot of persons together. So definitely we want to continue using that as means to advocate. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Giovanni. With that being said, if anyone else has any final comments or final words, you could do so.
Hi. So I just want to I made a note here. Moureeze said something, that I struggled with a little while ago, and I kind of had to reevaluate and then change my approach a bit. And it was, when persons may want information, but you tell them to read and you tell them to do all these things and do the research. And I remember a time somebody asked me something and I said, Google is free. Like, that was just my response, because to me it is, and it's so easy to get information now. Like, we'll seek information from so many other places about so many things, but the things that we claim that we're really interested in about, we won't do. And I had to take a minute to think about that response and then recognize that everybody isn't as interested in certain things as I am. So I think information on consent is so easy to find, and information on women empowerment and the women movement and what feminism is. I think that information is so easy to find and so interesting to read. So I would read the entire paper that the UN wrote in 2018 to get the information that I want. But everybody isn't interested or isn't willing to do that. That isn't how everybody digests information. And so it's so important that as youth advocates and in youth organizations, we create information that people find easy to digest and that people are in a manner where people are willing and interested in participating. So for example, some of us will sit down through a 25-minute talk and that's it. Other people just want that information in 3 minutes. So how do you give it to them in 3 minutes? And then my final thing is about having joint campaigns across the region that talk to very specific issues. And one of the things that I want to close by saying is that young people need to show up for themselves. As young people, we need to show up for ourselves, because a lot of times we talk about government and we want other stakeholders to bet on us and support us. And we pull teeth to do very simple things, to lend each other support, to post a poster, to come to a forum. So for example, there's this forum going on and we're talking, and we can pull 10 friends to go to a fete perhaps easily, but there are 34 persons in the chat currently. Where are we pulling up for ourselves? Where are we showing up and showing up for ourselves and showing that we are betting on ourselves? And so as it relates to CRIC, I just want to close by saying that we have a campaign running currently that's the perfect time to show up. And it's called Bet on Youth. And it really focuses on young people telling other persons and other young people why you should bet on youth. And the reason for that is because if you can tell people why should they believe in you. What are the priorities that you have? What is the kind of future that you want to see for the region? Do you want an inclusive region? Do you want a region that everybody can thrive in, one that encourages and embraces everybody regardless of who they are, where they come from? And I just want to invite everyone who's on and who's listening to join the campaign. You have the ability, if you win, you can get 500 US. And that's yours, and that's because we want to encourage young people to pull up and show up. And if we don't pull up and show up for ourselves, then who's going to pull up and show up for us? And that's really what I want to close with. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Roshana.
I just wanted to respond real quick. Just for clarity, I wasn't necessarily speaking of the situation where you expect the person to do the research or anything like that themselves. I was speaking of a situation where you're literally, I've handed you the material, I've distilled it, I've broken it down, I've done everything necessary except maybe open your brain and stick it in, but you just refuse.
Okay, thank you, Moureeze. So now we move on to Danielle, and we will close off after. Yeah.
In terms of that question that Lucian asked about the charge for young people, and was it Dennis and Moureeze talked about people reading. Yes, there's access to general information online, but in terms of building on what people have done in your country, in your space, a lot of the times, okay, I can talk from my context, sometimes those people don't want to hand over some of that information, don't want to be part of what you're doing in that organization. And so it's hard. And then you realize the lack of monitoring and evaluation that has happened in the Caribbean when it comes to NGOs and LGBT organizations. A lot of this stuff has not been written down. So you are trying to remake the wheel. You are trying to do these things because there is no real evidence, I guess, quote unquote, no real research done by the people before you. And I think, yes, a lot of great work has been done, and by hand, word of mouth and stuff, you can get some of that. But for me, what I've learned from that now is to make sure that whatever it is that I'm doing, that I make sure to write it down. I make sure that it is documented so that people that come after me do have something to build on.
Thank you very much, Danielle. With that, I'd just like to personally thank all our panelists, you, Danielle, Ajani, Moureeze, Roshana, Tember, Giovanni. And I mean, Dennis has already left us. But thank you all for deciding to participate, hoping there'll be a part 2 or part 3, because it seems like it's a very interesting conversation that we're having, and it should be continued, and more people should be aware. So again, thank you guys very much. And to all the attendees, thank you for joining. And I'm looking forward to seeing you guys again on Youth Dialogue Part 2. Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.